I could flee very high.
It's a new day, but not on the Enterprise. We're in a stone structure of some sort, one that looks like it hasn't been used for a while, and Tucker and Hoshi are taking photos of the pictographic markings inside. Not for long, though, as there's a call from the Enterprise. The plan was to fly back in our shuttle before an incoming storm hit, but a larger and faster-moving storm has decided it wants to get involved as well. It's full of science wibblies, meaning the shuttle wouldn't be safe, so it's time for Tucker and Hoshi to each have their first go in the teleporter. Hoshi doesn't fancy being squirted through the molecular scrambler and insists Tucker go first, which is a curious interpretation of the chain of command, but let's ignore that for now. He calls down from the ship once he arrives to let her know it's fine, so up Hoshi goes as well. She's a little shaken on arrival, but seems otherwise fine. Getting cleaned up feels prudent, given how much shit that storm was throwing around, though she appears to be taking an interest in the details on her face. A doorbell heralds the arrival of Archer to make sure she's okay. He thinks she should take the rest of the day off under the circumstances. Besides, she'll need to be fresh tomorrow for going back down there. She's slightly resistant at the prospect of returning to the planet, and being told it won't be by teleporter doesn't persuade her. She says she doesn't want to get lost, a comment that confuses Archer. He lets it go when she says she could do with some rest, and once he's gone, she returns to the mirror and continues checking her face. She's in the mess hall some time later and joins Tucker, Reed and Travis, eventually anyway, as they don't notice her first request to join them. Travis asks her what teleporting was like, and she admits she hasn't felt entirely normal since getting back. That starts a tangent from Reed and Tucker about a lad called Cyrus Ramsey, a test subject during early teleporter experiments who simply never reappeared. A call from Archer interrupts to say the storm's clearing up, and that he thinks the next away team will be without Hoshi. Travis is chosen and the lads leave, none of whom acknowledge Hoshi before doing so. Perhaps that snub was taken personally, as when she visits Phlox in sickbay, she's initially concerned that he didn't hear her coming in. He explains he was off feeding his menagerie before asking what's wrong. In short, she doesn't know, though she's certain something is off. He gives her a scan and says her molecules look just fine to him, only for her to say a birthmark on her face isn't where it used to be. This is about as convincing as you would expect, so he politely tells her to piss off and get some sleep. Looks like Hoshi took Phlox's advice, more so than anticipated in fact, as she's several hours late for work when she receives a call from T'Pol to tell her she's needed for an emergency. The follow-up away mission of Tucker and Travis has gone pear-shaped. More specifically, they've been taken hostage by the people on the planet, which is odd because we didn't detect any life signs before. Odder still is that T'Pol says it's because we disturbed religious relics, something Hoshi notes T'Pol could hardly know without being able to speak to them. Regardless, we need Hoshi to translate their language and negotiate a hostage release. It fails, both through the translator and Hoshi's skills, so Archer says she should return to her quarters and has a different guy take over. Back to her room she goes, though the oddness follows her there. First her reflection briefly fades in the mirror, then she starts to disappear in the shower as well, before things return to normal. Sounds weird, but weird is normal for Starfleet, so we're going to roll with it and visit the mess hall instead. T'Pol doesn't seem to hear Hoshi's request to join her, instead inviting her to the table after noticing she was just standing there. Oh, and that hostage thing is sorted now too. The lad who took over from Hoshi had no trouble getting the translator working, so he's been put in charge of the phones, and she's going to be taking a little break. Perhaps the news has spread and Hoshi's become a pariah. That might be why she gets blanked in a corridor later on, though it doesn't explain the lift controls not responding to her, or hearing distant echoes of Reed and Tucker talking about her. All this weirdness has her concerned enough to revisit Phlox. He doesn't seem to have any problems seeing and hearing her, and listens to her concerns about everything going a bit weird since she went through the teleporter. He still thinks it's in her head, though is at least diplomatic about it, and says he wouldn't personally touch the teleporter with a 10-foot pole. Perhaps that reassurance of her concern being reasonable, combined with Phlox actually being able to see her, is all she needed. With a promise that he won't be putting this in her permanent record, off she goes. A trip to the gym appeals to Hoshi more than the idea of rest, and she finds Tucker arsing about in a gyroscope. He can see her just like Phlox could, and his little hostage adventure on the planet hasn't caused any lasting effects. That prompts an apology from Hoshi, though Tucker waves it away and says he's fine. She's not fine, though, and admits as much to him. She explains all the weird goings-on, and that Phlox thinks it's all in her head. Understandable, says Tucker, as none of us are used to teleporting yet. He prescribes sleep just like Phlox did, then buggers off. That means Hoshi's alone when the oddness reappears and her hand passes through some weights. The same happens with the door controls, and a large mirror confirms her fears as she slowly disappears. Hoshi's asleep in the gym because she couldn't use the door controls to get out. We'll assume she didn't fancy trying to pass through the door like she did with the weights and controls. Either way, she's delighted when T'Pol and Tucker arrive, though less so when they don't see or hear her, and less again when they start talking about Hoshi having disappeared. There's a ship-wide search on for her apparently, and she follows them out when Archer calls T'Pol to sickbay. Phlox is a touch uncomfortable when he explains how Hoshi visited him before with concerns, mostly because he's double-checked his scans and discovered she was right. In short, it's very likely she was disintegrating. A look at the teleporter shows that a minor fault developed just after Tucker came aboard. We stick an out-of-service sign on the teleporter, and after Phlox explains the likely outcome of her molecules separating, the crew stops looking for Hoshi and starts looking for Hoshi residue. We're in a Jeffries tube sometime afterwards and tracking down bits of Hoshi. She's telling them they're wrong, and not being heard, of course, when she herself hears something the others don't. It's a repeat of the echoes from earlier, Tucker and Reed talking about her. Hoshi gives up trying to listen to the echoes when Tucker and Phlox identify some Hoshi paste. Her parents will want it, thinks Phlox, so he scoops the goop and buggers off. Tucker hangs around and has a bit of a guilt trip, whilst also blaming Hoshi incidentally, before following Phlox, though Hoshi decides to stay when she hears something again. It's not the echoes this time, but rather some aliens attaching gizmos to the ship. Hoshi thinks this is worth bothering Archer, and she's figured out she can walk through doors now, though she's not sure how to accomplish getting his attention. Even worse, she chooses the time when he's trying to place a call to her parents to let them know that she's dead. Hoshi's dad isn't really taking it in and asks him to call back, which is handy as that's around the same time as Hoshi finding she can cause some wiring to make a noise if she sticks her hand in it. Archer notices the noise after hanging up and a light flashing in time to it, so calls T'Pol in. She assumes it's a fault, but Archer identifies it as Morse code, specifically SOS. Trying to change the message gives T'Pol a reason to dismiss it as random again, and she manages to convince Archer it is as well. They leave as Hoshi tries unsuccessfully to tell them there are aliens planting bombs all over the ship. She's learned a new trick now, though, so she uses it to fuck about with the arming mechanism for all those bombs. Feels pretty risky to me, but as the alternative is letting the buggers explode anyway, I don't suppose there's much to lose. It works, and one fiddle disables the lot. It's academic, as the aliens just replace it, and she can't switch that one off. Job done from the looks of things, and the aliens teleport in a new gizmo. This disc on the floor is a teleport pad apparently, and they use it to bugger off. This coincides with the echoes of Tucker and Reed again, only it's a lot clearer this time, and they're talking about Hoshi and teleporting. That seems to make up her mind, so she hops onto the alien pad herself, then disappears. Hoshi's back, and she looks a lot like she did when she was teleported up from the planet. This, of course, is because she's just been teleported up from the planet. There was no kidnapping, no disappearing, no Hoshi paste in a Jeffries tube, no call to her dad, and no alien bombs. The only thing that's happened in the 8 seconds it took her to appear is Tucker and Reed shitting themselves because the storm caused 1 or 2 oopsies with the teleporter. Sounds like a good reason to get checked over by Phlox, who explains she probably imagined it all in the couple of seconds it took for the teleporter to rebuild her. Archer's impressed, though, him presumably having been told the story she imagined. He thinks her choosing to step onto the alien pad is a sign of courage, rather than a cheap MacGuffin to Deus Ex Machina the end of a shit story, so we'll leave Hoshi to debate which one of those options might be closer to the truth, as we get ready to take another step on the long road. And it was all just a dream. The original big red reset button rears its unwelcome head and pisses away 40 minutes of your life, rendering everything you've seen essentially irrelevant. Those of you who've been here for a while will know that I'm often a harsh judge of time-fuckery stories, and the reason behind that is the same as the problem with today's story, because they have a tendency to end with, "Psych, not really." I still consider Voyager's Year of Hell to be one of the best stories Star Trek has never told, instead choosing to erase all it could have been, rather than commit to a season-long arc with the potential to provide the continuity and consequences that show's premise was crying out for. Perhaps that's part of why I so despise the big red reset button in all its forms. In a universe of infinite possibilities, it feels vaguely wasteful to take a bottle of Tipex to what you've just written. This isn't telling a story and it ending. This is telling a story and then running a magnet over the tape. And before you bring up Course Oblivion, a story for which I have great respect, and say it's every bit as irrelevant as Year of Hell was, I'd argue it's a different kettle of fish. The whole crux of Year of Hell is that it categorically did not happen. Course Oblivion did, and the fact nobody will ever know about it is its own separate tragedy, one that serves to compound the disaster we were shown. It's the difference between seeing a Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and being told there wasn't really a war after all. I'm waffling about a pet peeve again, so let's bring it back to today's story. If we're being entirely fair, we can at least argue today's episode isn't subject to a full deletion. The plot itself might have been rendered utterly irrelevant by a reveal that was heavily telegraphed throughout, but we could say it serves as another glimpse into Hoshi's psyche, if we're being generous. That's assuming her choices were all conscious, of course, rather than simply dream stuff, in which case it's all a waste of bloody time, but Archer seemed to believe Hoshi was controlling it at the end, so let's follow his lead and have a closer look. Hoshi fearing both failure and unknown risk is nothing new. We've had a few stories shedding light on this aspect of her, and as I've said during the analyses of those, it makes a refreshing change to see a member of Starfleet with an actual working self-preservation instinct. The premise of Hoshi's mind throwing out the occasional, "Hold on a minute, I didn't sign up for this shit," is an idea that I can get behind. In a world overflowing with fearless bravery, the reluctant hero is the most compelling. It's part of what made characters like Quark or plain simple Garak so endearing to me. The issue with this is precisely what I've just said, though. We've already had stories shedding light on this aspect of her. We know the baggage she's dealing with, and seeing it from the inside, frankly, isn't sufficiently different to warrant yet another look. Hoshi has a fear that gets in the way of her job, and she faces it in the end. If I gave you that sentence in isolation, could you be sure I was talking about today's story rather than any of the ones that came before? I'm not convinced. Again, if we're being fair, today's delve into her psyche isn't entirely based on failure and risk. Part of it is the fear of being considered surplus to requirements. The ease with which she was replaced by Travis on the second away mission, the crewman who uses an automated system to do her job better than she did, the very idea of becoming insubstantial and unable to register upon those around you, they're all variations on the fear of becoming irrelevant. If we're theorizing, we could suggest this fear ties into her risk aversion and how that makes her less of an all-rounder than her peers. Hoshi's core job is one of the most heavily specialized on the ship, so having concerns about being of limited use in more common tasks is entirely understandable. Whether those fears were deliberately intended to fit together rather than me just pulling the theory out of my arse, I don't know, but it feels believable either way. Is that enough to carry the episode, though? For me, no. We could have a chat about how consciousness works in the teleport buffer, I suppose. Maybe dip into the questions of external perception and time based on her hearing the same conversation at 3 different points in the story, but the episode didn't give a shit about any of that, so why should we? It's first and foremost a showcase of Hoshi's brain, and while a chance to explore a character would normally be right up my alley, there just isn't enough here of interest to fill the time. If you're going to make a meal of focusing on someone's psyche, you need to be sure you're bringing enough new flavors to the table, and that's doubly true if you're going to end it by saying the food wasn't real. Today's offering fails to be either filling or a sufficiently curious little amuse-bouche. For all my light-hearted derision of what I call chicken nugget stories, at least you know you've eaten something when the credits roll on those. End of episode.
We need a B-plot.
Yeah, what?
Whenever an episode doesn't have enough going on, the writers stick in a little side story to make up the runtime. Hoshi making the translator work for Porthos isn't enough to fill another dozen credit skits, so we need a B-plot to paper over the gap.
How's that gonna work for us, though? B-plots are a way to give some work to the characters that aren't being used in main story. We don't have any other characters, do we?
We do though, we've got Astro Chien and Ordinator.
No thank you.
Not interested.
Oh. Okay, well what about Al, or the artist formerly known as Dancing Baby?
I already had
A cameo.
and I may or may not be dead.
Bollocks. What about the patrons? Do you think they'd be up for it?
Every one of those we've invited on got tossed out of an airlock, remember? Under the circumstances, I reckon there won't be much demand.
Double bollocks. I'll go and have another think. Woof.